The last one was by Professor Parag Patel, who gave us a fascinating insight into personal finances and how to grow our wealth, something we could all learn a bit from. Today we have Professor Sarthak Bagchi from SAS, the School of Arts and Sciences, who teaches in the Social and Political Sciences major. And he will be talking to us on the very important topic of understanding political finance. And this is something that political scientists all over have been working on much before it became such a headline-grabbing issue. So he's going to enlighten us some about how to understand an issue like this. Just a few words about this faculty lecture series, because I think perhaps it's still, the idea is still new to a lot of people. And the idea is basically that all of our faculty from every school who work on such a diverse, who work on such a range of topics, they come forward and speak from their disciplinary or training vantage point to an issue of wider concern, to an issue of more general concern. And so that we sort of facilitate inter-school exchange and conversation. Last time we had the talk at the Arts and Sciences Faculty Lounge. This time it's in this lovely GICT space. Next time we look for another space. So it keeps moving. Food is very important, so we try to outdo each other in how nice the food is, so it's only going to get nicer and nicer. So that's another sop. So please help yourself to a plate of something and then come and sit down, and we'll start the talk. And Sarthak, maybe say 35 to 40 minutes, and then we can open it out for questioning. Okay.
So please concentrate on the food. This, what I'm going to say is just a background act. So food is the main hero here. Just wanted to put that out. But I hope the food is without garlic and onion, because clearly the lady in question here doesn't use garlic and onion in her food. So I think Professor Parag Patel had nicely done this very fabulous presentation about how to grow personal wealth. And I think at least, I don't know about the audience in that lecture, how much they understood that, but I think the political class has really understood that message in India, and they have really worked and exemplified how to increase your personal wealth. And I'll be talking about that in today's talk, in today's lecture, which is about this topic of political finance in India, and how do we understand, what do we mean by political finance. Yesterday, a colleague was telling me that yeah, they have not really heard about this term, political finance. I think we all know that a lot of money is being used, almost around, I think, $18 billion worth of money is being used in campaigns for the 2024 election, according to one data source in the Carnegie Mellon Foundation. But yet we don't really maybe understand or recall having heard this word political finance and what does it mean. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit in today's talk. But before we begin with that inquiry, I thought it might be pertinent to understand how do politicians, or what do politicians mean when they say that they don't have that kind of money to contest elections. So this is our finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, who recently made this claim. Of course, she has also claimed that she doesn't use onion and garlic in her food, so she is not bothered by that price rise. But she said that I don't have that kind of money to contest elections. So one general thought, or I got curious that what kind of money is needed to contest elections actually. And it ranges, so there is no one kind of money that is required if you are contesting an election, and also that differs from different kinds of election, whether it is an MLA election or an MP election, or a municipal, or a panchayat election, or whether in which state, in which region of India are you contesting that election. So while in Bihar or Gujarat, the election expenses can, or the cost of contesting elections successfully can come under, say, 2 to 5 crore rupees. And this is based on various conversations with candidates who have contested elections, who have won elections, who have lost elections also. So to a range of 2 crore rupees to 5 crore rupees will be something which a candidate has to spend for elections. And that is in, say, a state like Bihar or in Gujarat. In Maharashtra, that cost can go up, say, around from 5 to 10 crore rupees, that will be the range. And if we just cross the border from Maharashtra and step into Telangana or Andhra Pradesh, that cost can actually go up to 50 crore rupees to 100 crore rupees even. And then the question is, why would be this kind of variation? Why do we see this kind of variation? And why do we see this kind of rise in the cost of contesting elections? And again, there are a lot of specifications in this, so I would try to keep it as general as possible. But one of the ideas of how this cost is calculated is actually according to the Election Commission, because of course all of us have heard that Election Commission has set some kind of norms and boundaries or ideas of how much every candidate should be spending, right? Because there is, after all, the level playing field, as we know. And that boundary or that limitation is common for all candidates. So all candidates contesting in Gujarat, say for the assembly election, will get an amount of up to 70 lakh rupees to spend in their constituencies. And so if you are contesting for the Lok Sabha candidature or Lok Sabha parliamentary elections, you will get about 95 lakh rupees. That's the upper limit of expenses. And all the expenses has to be within this limit of 95 lakh rupees. That's the current limit. Of course, in some states, this limit can be lesser depending on the type of constituency and the nature of the constituency, number of people involved in the constituency, etc. But the overall idea is that this limit will be common for all. And this limit is actually calculated from the day of the nomination. So when the candidate is filing the nomination, from that day onwards till the day of polling, and actually campaign stops on the day before polling. So till that end of the campaign period, which is a period of 14 days usually, that period is the field during which this amount is monitored and this amount is calculated. So that's the idea, that is the kind of money that our finance minister was talking about, that she doesn't have that kind of money, right? And of course, I will come to address the point that where is all this money needed and where all this money is spent on, right? But if we look at this idea, that I think in order to understand what is political finance and why do we need to study it, I think it's also important perhaps to understand what are political parties, right? So political parties are primarily defined by the common aim, as Joseph Schumpeter had called it, that the only idea is to, foremost aim of each political party is to prevail over the others in order to get power or to stay in it, right? And that's what we are seeing, that this is the election platform, or this is a time in which we see these aspirations of each party being played out and performed in front of almost a 970 million strong electorate. And political parties are also providing certain functions in the society. They are integrating, mobilizing citizens, sometimes even polarizing, and that's a way of mobilization, of course. Articulation of interest, formulation of public policies, recruitment of political leaders, and organization of the government, forming the government and forming legislatures at different levels. So these are various functions of political parties. And for all of these functions, political parties need some kind of money, some kind of financing. So if you look at them as institutions, they need some money to govern themselves, to carry out all these functions. And this realm of studying how political parties actually organize themselves and gather these funds, organize these funds, this is something which is known as, political finance, understanding party finance or political finance, which is also called as election finance or campaign finance. So these are terms which are often used in place of each other. And this is again to mobilize support to promote candidates, for advertising their achievements also, and also for reaching out to voters and connecting with them and connecting their own policy programs and ideologies, etc. Political parties need money, and that the study of how they get this money and organize this money is basically the field of political finance. Now, broadly, the field of political finance can be divided into two fields. One is the idea of having a contribution side and a spending side, right? So, yeah. So, contribution is basically how do political parties gather the funds, collect the funds. Who are the people who are giving the funds, the donors, the donations, right? And the spending side will amount to the political parties and the politicians, how are they spending this money, right? And I think these two are very different because these two, both of them have an impact on how democracies function and how the quality of democracy is maintained or checked or even evaluated at different times. Of course, if you don't like how Western powers or Western ideas evaluate your standards of democracy, you can always build your own standards and create a new kind of a guideline, but that's a different topic. I'll not get into that, maybe in the question answers. But the contribution side is to understand that traditionally, when we looked at political parties, they started with this idea of membership-driven political contributions, that you would often find that Congress members would donate 1 rupee to be a member, and then therefore that was the way in which political contributions were collected. Communist parties did this. Members used to pay and become member. And membership-driven contributions also somehow reflect ideological strengthening, in the sense that you will be giving your money really if you are actually convinced and ideologically operated, ideologically aligned with that party. And it also kind of represents the kind of massive organizational strength of a party, that see, a party is a cadre-based party, we call them, and therefore they have the cadre who are dedicated, ideologically motivated, and they are also contributing to the fund. Somehow we also find today, in the way in which political funding has taken shape, a party like BJP, which claims to be the world's largest party in terms of membership. So a party like BJP, which claims that it has 10 crore members, and if each of them, those 10 crore members, are asked to pay 100 rupees, the BJP would easily gather 1,000 crore rupees, by means of just, membership-driven contributions. If they ask, if you are even furthermore ideologically motivated and very impressed with BJP, you can even pay 500 rupees for your membership, and there you have 5,000 crore rupees, which is almost matching the amount of money that the BJP got from the electoral bonds. But then we see that parties are not doing this. Parties are really not following the membership route of contributions, and there are reasons for that. And that membership route of contributions has now been shifted or replaced to rather a corporate kind of contributions. It's not that corporate contributions are something new. It has always been there. It has been a very integral part of how political parties have operated, even from the Congress time and immediately after post-independence also. However, in 1968, Indira Gandhi decided to ban corporate donations to political parties, and it was basically, the reason that was given was, large business groups will be, exercising undue influence, and they will be, influencing or kind of, creating biases in terms of policy implementation. And 1968 is also the time in which India was actually going into a very socialist kind of an ideological leaning. So, of course, Indira Gandhi decided to ban corporate donations. But I think many of scholars have actually written that much of this decision was actually to control opposition funding and the funding received by opposition parties, especially like parties like, which were market-friendly parties like Swatantra Party, to get corporate donations. So it was seen as some kind of a blocking line of funding for opposition parties. The ban on corporate parties was also not accompanied by any kind of a state sponsoring or state funding of elections, which actually has been carried out in many other countries, like say in Italy and in Germany. There is state funding of elections, which has actually accompanied any kind of ban on corporate funding, right? So in India, we see that time and again, if you look at the history of political funding legislations and rules, we will find that often the reforms is how I basically kind of categorize this as one step forward and two step backward, because the real intent has not ever been to clean the system, but to create certain small breakpoints which would create an image of change without actually changing many things and keeping most of the things as it is, as they were. And we will see that this is a common theme across party lines. This is something which one would find this consistency in maintaining a kind of opacity in political funding, or maintaining minimum levels of transparency in political funding or political finance has been common across different parties and across different regimes. In 1979, one would find that political parties were actually exempted from income and wealth taxes. And they had to also submit their audited accounts. Now, this is again very interesting, that it's like, I liken it to the example of having a ceiling fan in a government office, which is there and which is moving, but it doesn't give any kind of air or any cool air. Like, it's just there, it's doing its job, but it's not doing its job also, right? The idea of auditing, which was introduced for political parties, is that there will be auditing, but these are not third-party external auditors. So political parties have been, there is a mandatory requirement that all political parties have to submit audited accounts in each financial year, but the auditors can be of the party's choice. So there you go. There is a policy, but the intent of the policy is clearly not to have the effect that this policy might have had, right? In 1985, Rajiv Gandhi, just a second. In 1985, Rajiv Gandhi amended this Corporate Donation or Companies Act, and he once again allowed corporate donations to political parties, but the condition was the parties were allowed to donate up to 5% of their profit of the last 3 financial years. So of the last 3 financial years, political parties would be able to, or would be eligible for getting up to 5% of the profit. That was the cap which was put on corporate donations, and corporate donations were allowed in a certain way. In 1990, and there had been certain commissions in between also, which had always tried to build towards more reform for the electoral funding and for political finance, and build more reforms towards, again, I'll look at a very critical component of this aspect in the political spending, which is delinking of party spending versus candidate spending. And I'll come to that. But there were reforms in between also, which always suggested but not really implemented. In 1990, the National Front government, which was the VP Singh government, the Goswami report constituted the Dinesh Goswami Committee on Electoral Reforms. And the Goswami report also this was also one of the first steps towards a kind of state subsidy for elections, that they were taking care of certain expense items, like say vehicle fuel and other things. But it was a very half-hearted attempt at actually cleansing or changing the way in which election funding could actually happen. So this was again, there was the ban on corporate donations was advocated, but it was not exercised, and of course state funding was still out of reach. Yes. Yeah, 79 is Congress government actually, when it came back. Yeah. No, 80 it came back. Yeah, 79 is actually Charan Singh. So he was in that period, in that 5-month period. So, right. So this is done, yes. So in 1998 also, again, partial state subsidy is, is extended to political funding, to party funding, but there is no full attempt to do that. one of the most significant reforms happened to party finances in terms of in 1993, in 1999, when it was basically, since 1999 rather, that in 2003, the NDA government, under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, it actually led to 100% tax deductible corporate, contributions and individual contributions. So this was said that any kind of individual contribution or any kind of a contribution to political parties would be 100% tax exempted. And this actually created some kind of an incentive for creating, political contributions through check and not really this black money. Again, when we started with this in 1968 with the banning of the corporate funding, the debate about funding always focused on this use of black money, because when Indira Gandhi banned the corporate funding, one of the ways in which parties would actually gather funds was through the idea of black money or opaque donations, right? In fact, there is this very important kind of a work by political scientist Stanley Kochanek, which talks about briefcase politics. So briefcase politics gives that image that in the Congress dominance or in the Indira Gandhi dominant era, there would be people or there would be corporate lobbyists who will be waiting at political offices with briefcase full of cash. And that was the idea that, when Narendra Modi and others are also talking about the slashing of this kind of black money or this kind of illicit funding, this is that image of people moving around with, loose cash in briefcases, and that's the idea that Kochanek called it briefcase politics. So black money idea was always there, but the reform of 2003 by the NDA government created a move or created a shift or enabled, a more formal way of, corporate, individual and corporate donations. In 2013, the UPA government started with the Electoral Trust, and this was the idea that private companies would be allowed to form a trust so that they could combine their assets in order to fund political parties, and they could actually fund multiple political parties. So one trust could actually fund multiple political parties of their liking, and this created certain kind of a transparency also, but there were also certain kind of restrictions which I'll just focus on in a moment. In 2017 came the the biggest kind of news about electoral funding or electoral contributions that we know as electoral bonds. And the late Arun Jaitley, who was the finance minister at that time, he introduced electoral bonds with the aim of removing the usage of black money and also institutionalizing a more very corporatized way of funding, electoral funding, which was supposed to have an idea of anonymizing information about both the donors and the receivers. So the way in which electoral bonds worked was here. So notified banks were chosen, which was of only the SBI, which was the state sponsored bank. And then, of course, they are given electoral bonds. The donor, they can, and these bonds have a window. So the bonds have a window of 15 days, right? So they are announced. So the bonds are also not always available. They are available at particular times of the year, during which the bonds will be announced and it will be advertised in public. And then those who are interested can go and buy these bonds in the bank. And then the donor gives the party of his or her choice the bond within the specified time frame. And the party has to deposit these bonds within a period of 15 days. And the details of which are with the Election Commission. So the point is, the party, knows that the money is coming, but there was anonymization of the donor, that the parties wouldn't be knowing which donor or who has donated this, and this money, this information, of course, would not be given to anybody else also. The bank has this, and this money, this information was also given to the ECI. So in a way, the information was not really given into the public realm, but the bank which was operating on this had an idea of who is giving the donations. Yes. So all donations to the political parties are already tax rebated. Yeah, so the money that you are buying the bond, you are giving a donation to the political party. So that donation is not taxable. It is already exempted from tax, right? Because of the 2003 amendment, right? So that I'm coming to that also, because that is another important part of the electoral bonds. That first of all, earlier when the corporate bond, when the corporate funding was reintroduced by Rajiv Gandhi, there was a cap of 5% of the profit of the last 3 financial years. That profit or that cap was extended to 7.5%. In the electoral bond scheme, which came in 2017, this limit was removed. So there was no limit to which a corporate entity could actually donate. And I will reveal that with the data also. When we look at the data, it will be more clear that there are companies which have a market capitalization of say 300 crore rupees, for example. But these companies are giving electoral bonds, buying electoral bonds worth 3,000 crore rupees, right? So that it changed the game, that the limitations of or the restrictions of the cap on upper limit on corporate funding was completely removed. That's one part. Second part, I'll just come to you. Second part was the companies need not give this in their audit reports. This is the idea of anonymizing the donations, and this was actually promised as the anonymity. The anonymity was one of the incentives of increasing donations by corporate entities so that they can actually donate freely. Why? Because companies have always been, why did the companies use the black money? Because of course corporate donations were banned, but also companies were always under the kind of threat or under the presumption that if the party to which they have donated, if that doesn't come to power, they would be persecuted or they would be threatened by certain kind of institutional actions and other things, right? So that was the idea. To remove that, political parties were exempted from putting this into their audits also. So they did not have to report this. Sorry. So I think that data was coming from this SBI. So that data would be there with the SBI, that the bonds have been given. So the party can only realize the bond from the notified bank. So the party only gets it from the notified bank. Right. So yeah. So that I will change that. So one more thing about the electoral bond is that it also changed the way in which foreign contributions have been working in Indian elections. So till now foreign contributions were not allowed, right? And this electoral bond has actually changed the FCRA regulations also, in a way enabling political parties to get foreign funding for contributions to their own coffers. Now the question is, how did they change it? And this was changed actually again by a strange consensus between all political parties by changing the definition of what stands for a foreign company. So that was done in the parliament in order to change the way in which foreign companies were allowed to engage or to give foreign funding, to give funding for political parties. Now coming back to this question, I think, okay, so yeah, so now if I look at this again to the other argument of where is the spending, why do these political parties need so much money, or why do these political parties require so much money? Of course, I have mentioned in the previous slides that they have to work at, they have to provide certain functions and that they take care of. But one of the important things to understand is the Representation of People's Act 1951 is basically introduce certain limits on the money that every candidate could spend, right? And that amount has been gradually increased as price of other things have increased and other things. But what has interestingly happened is when this earlier, at the time of this inception of this law, candidates were actually, had to also account for the kind of money that was spent on their campaigns by political parties as well as third party spending. So if somebody else is also campaigning in the constituency on behalf of the candidate's expense accounts had to register or had to include those kind of expenses also, right? And this was also actually reinforced by a Supreme Court ruling in 1974 that actually linked candidates' expenses with parties' expenses in favor of the candidate. And in 1975, Indira Gandhi's government actually amended the Representation of People's Act, to delink party expenditure from candidate expenditure. And I think this is something which is very critical and important as a factor or as a part of understanding the entire idea of why these distortions in political funding and distortions in electoral spending happens, because while we have the limits which I said in the beginning that of 70 lakh rupees or 95 lakh rupees for candidate expenditure, candidate spending, there are no limits for how much a party can spend for elections, right? There are no limits. So BJP can spend 5,000 crore rupees, 6,000 crore rupees on elections. Congress can spend 1,000 crore rupees on their Bharat Jodo Yatra or on their election campaigns, and that is not under any kind of a limitation. So what this does is it creates massive unevenness or inequality between political parties. Like big national parties which have major donors, which have corporate donors, are always able to spend more money as compared to regional parties or local level parties which still do not have that kind of money. So an RJD in Bihar or a BJD in Odisha would not be able to spend that much money. We saw that, however, that idea is a bit naive also to believe, because we saw during the electoral bonds list that that kind of distortion was also in a way leveled by the electoral bonds, because we saw that parties which are very much entrenched in their states, like say the Bharatiya Rashtra Samiti in Telangana or the Trinamool Congress in West Bengal, managed to gather a lot of corporate funds also from their party, and that comes to a different kind of a problem of electoral funding, but I'll come to that in a moment. So yes, the delinking is very important. That this made the election expenditure, the limit on election expenditure is largely ineffective, as it was limited to a candidate's direct expenditures only, and parties could spend without any limit. So we are currently working on this project on understanding campaign finances in India, and there are some researchers who are working in different parts of Indian, like in Andhra Pradesh and Odisha right now. So I just got a message from a few days ago. I got a message from one of the researchers in Andhra Pradesh, and he was actually following the candidate for a nomination rally, the assembly candidate, and he said that there's a very strange way of how these candidates are also managing their expenses or manage to show what expenses. So for the nomination rally, much of the expenses that the candidate is listing is headed to the district party president, or is given under the head of the district party president or the mandal party leader, so that it is going to the party and not considered as something which is the candidate is spending. And this is happening, this is just one example of how this subversion of the data happens. Yes. That's actually true, because and again people like, and this is again a problem. Of course Nirmala Sitharaman, there can be different perceptions about Nirmala Sitharaman, but somebody like say Jaishankar, S. Jaishankar, who is very popular and who is educated, well-to-do, or even say Ashwini Vaishnav, but these will not be looked at as winnable candidates by political parties, because parties, and even a party like BJP, would be reluctant in spending money on their candidates, because they all want candidates who are self-financing. And not only self-financing, but also candidates who are subsidizing the election cost for other people. So if you actually want a ticket, party ticket from TDP in Andhra Pradesh, you have to, you have to give assurance that you will take care of at least 3 to 4 MLA candidates' expenditure also, right? And that is when TDP or any other regional party or any other political party will give you a ticket, that you have to show that you are not only spending or able to spend for your own campaign, but also subsidize for other candidates also, right? And that has unfortunately been covered in a very nice or popular term called winnability. So winnability basically means that you have to have a very large amount of money. Yeah. So, I mean, many parties actually, in fact, more, and I have a case of that also. In the end, I'll talk about that, because many parties in the regional, in regional politics are actually known for these kind of, deals for tickets in exchange of ticket, money in exchange of ticket. Yes, yes. So, yeah, and again, the limits were changed, but the delinking is something which is very important. And there has again been a very strange kind of consensus between political parties to keep this kind of delinking intact. But what actually, and why should we be concerned with this? Or why should we actually bother about these kind of, things? One of the basic ideas is that, political finance, the nature of in how political finance operates in India in a very opaque manner is actually talking about, the lack of transparency. It also affects the quality of democracy. There is definitely a very strong evidence of increasing expenditure in elections, and what I just said, that idea of winnability has been translated into this very rich candidates and only people with certain amount of disposable income who will be able to contest elections and win elections, and that has created an entry barrier, and that entry barrier is quite high. So it not only affects political participation, like your ability to contest elections or to field probably more educated candidates, but also it affects the quality of choice that people have, voters have, right? So the choice is not between an educated person or somebody who's ideologically oriented or something, but the choice is between one money bags versus the other money bags, because money has become a necessary condition, if not a sufficient condition, to contest elections. And all parties are abiding by this kind of development. Extensive and overt reliance on money for elections also makes an artificial barrier, like I just said, and it also affects the nature of public representatives. And this also has been shown by several kinds of research across different countries also, that the kind of legislative assembly or legislative body members who are elected, who are coming to the parliaments and other platforms, are also increasingly becoming not really representative of the population, and that affects policy making, right? And that is, if you look at the wealth of politicians who are successful in getting tickets and who are successful in winning elections, you will realize that this is a very stark kind of a remark or stark kind of a evidence for the rising inequality in the society also, that in representative politics, the representatives are becoming less and less attached or less and less representative of the society or the electorate as such. This also creates this idea of distribution of money in elections, directly attacking the idea of free choice and autonomy of choice. Of course, there's a flip side of the argument that there can be actually more bargaining or more kind of negotiations by the voters who can actually now get more money from everywhere and then vote on their own. But we also see that large amounts of money distribution is not really something which is very constructive for the quality of democracy, because voters also can compromise long-term programmatic interest against some kind of clientelistic interest in the immediate realm. Clientelism is also not only to be seen between voters and politicians, but also between donors and politicians. And this is something which is very important to understand, the quid pro quo angle, right? And quid pro quo in terms of donors and political parties and politicians creates a sense of clientelistic accountability instead of the idea of democratic accountability. This was very much evident in the data which was released for the electoral bonds. If we look at here, this is the Supreme Court's order on, this is after the Supreme Court's order on electoral bonds, and these are some of the state statistics which I have just laid out, because I think the issue has been in discussion for a long time, and I mean for a long, I think, and it has been everywhere, I mean to say that it has been very prevalent. And I think everybody must have seen these kind of figures. But what is interesting to understand, one thing which I was pointing, that it's not only the national parties which are getting, but also regional parties. And so this actually indicates that parties are able to use institutional pressure in order to get campaign funding, right? A lot of the investigation which was done, 10 minutes, right? 5. I'll finish it. So a lot of the investigations which was done by some media channels on electoral bonds, or some media agencies on electoral bonds, revealed that there was a lot of misuse of institutional apparatus for funding. So like Darshini mentioned, that parties would be telephoning, donors would be telephoning the parties that, hey, we have done this. But parties also preempted certain kind of donations coming, because the owner of the company was in ED custody just before they donated. Or there have been multiple examples of that. And this is, ED might be at the central level, but at the state level also you have the state CID and other things, right? So this case of Haldia, it's not here, it's in the next slide, I think. It's there? Yeah, Haldia Energy, but I think there was another, the MKG Enterprise. Yeah, it's this Western UP Power Transmission and the MKG Enterprise. These are actually based in Kolkata, in West Bengal. And Mamata Banerjee's government sold a share of the state-owned dairy to this group, which then off-sold their own shares for triple the profit to a Singapore-based entity. So there is a, there was very interesting flow of transactions which happened before this group actually ended up paying so much money to, Trinamool Congress. So very willy-nilly deals were being harbored because of electoral bonds at several levels. It's not only at one level, of course, that is there and that's for all to see, but it was also happening in other places. About the quid pro quo, it's also important. About the quid pro quo, it's also important to understand that the nature of these companies. So you see this Megha Engineering, this SL Mining, so this was the company, sorry, Keventer Food Park Infra Limited. So this was the company which donated 195 crore rupees, and it actually benefited from favorable sale of the West Bengal state-owned dairy corporation by the Mamata Banerjee's government. You see this company, this Jindal Steel, there is Birla Carbon, there is also the SL Mining. So a lot of things we see that there are, very, very usual suspects of the natural resources or extractive industries, which have basically which are dependent on government contracts, right? Which are dependent on government's approval for licenses and other kind of permissions for extracting and making money. Then there are companies like Megha Engineering, which have been involved in Polavaram project and other kind of infrastructural project. And one of the ideas of big infrastructural growth and big infrastructural spending has been there in all state governments, right? So where KCR is advertising Telangana as the land of all highways and land of highways and irrigation projects, large scale irrigation projects. Jagan Mohan is advertising Andhra Pradesh as the highways which are directly going to like Amravati and maybe to Paradise also. So everywhere you see that this big massive idea of advertising of infrastructural growth, right, from Modi walking over bridges in Northeast and everything. And you see that infrastructure companies are one of the major funders. So there is that idea, and then you also have tunnel collapses in Uttarakhand. You also have 3-4 times inflation of prices in infrastructural projects like in the Polavaram project, right? And this is adding to the exchequer's kitty. So there is a lot of things which were already happening in the background, but the Supreme Court's verdict and this discussion about this opening up of electoral bonds has really opened a kind of can of worms, so to speak. But this has also exposed the way in which such kind of quid pro quo can actually happen. Interestingly, the point about percentage of profit, right? So up to 7.5% of profit for the last 3 years was allowed. But if you look at it, bonds as the share of net profit, right? So this is Future Gaming, which is the largest donor, which is a betting company, by the way, lottery company, right? This has 635% of its net profit. So the percentage of bonds is not 7.5% is the limit, remember. And this is 635%. Look at this Madan Lal Limited. Its net profit is 10 crore rupees, but it's the bond share that it is given is 1874% of its profit, right? Whether the cap is 7.5%. So 329%, this MKG Enterprise, which is actually a construction company again, building roads and other things. 329% of its profit of 58%, 53%, 72%. So you see that there is also this, usage of this idea that you are actually promoting certain kind of quid pro quo, and you are using state institutions in order to garner more funds and in order to gather 57% of all the money that was used via electoral bonds, right? And still the pity is that party is still not willing to fund the campaign of Nirmala Sitharaman. So that's a very important irony. But so the Supreme Court, I think here I have said the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court mandated in 2024 about in its verdict that these bonds are unconstitutional, right? It's not only not only controversial or bad or anything, but these are unconstitutional because the voter has the right to information that about their candidates, about their parties, and this is a right which cannot be taken away from the voters. With the same idea, the Supreme Court has also instituted in 2003 the judgment in which made it mandatory for all politicians to declare their financial assets and their criminal criminal record, which basically makes it all the more clear for us to understand the increasing criminality. The ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, have been putting up that data, right? And even then we saw that the record for criminality or the instances of criminal candidates is still growing. Therefore, the Supreme Court has actually revised that judgment and said that it is not only important for or enough for candidates to put the data or submit the affidavit at the time of filing elections, but it's also very important that political parties should advertise about such candidates and should advertise and explain the criminality. So often political parties, when they are actually nominating candidates criminals, they only say that there is a winnability factor. But Supreme Court's order has said that if you are nominating a criminal candidate, you have to clearly state that the criminality is on the basis of some kind of serious criminal charges or non-serious criminal charges, the information has to be there for the voter. And this bond promised, electoral bonds promised that there would not be any kind of information about the donors. And that is where this has been, completely turned on its head by the Election Commission. I wanted to also point towards one more point, I think. And so, yeah, I think there are concerns are pretty important also. And the idea of the level playing field is completely distorted. Which is important to understand also is the role of the Election Commission in this. So what this entire saga of the reforms and the kind of half-hearted attempts at cleaning the system but yet not cleaning it completely, it also indicates that the Election Commission has actually been made more feeble, or rather, it's often being called as a toothless tiger, right? So we saw that this idea, we have to also understand that this idea of, India as being a mother of democracy is also not something which is on loose grounds. It is actually grounded on very impressive records of conducting free and fair elections. One of the challenges was to conduct the election in 1952, which was actually from 1951 onwards. And the Election Commission really excelled in conducting those kind of obstacles. In 1991, 1990s, we saw T.N. Session, who came as a very important kind of an election commissioner and cleansed a lot of the system, and a lot of these ideas of booth capturing were, and criminal intimidation and other things were also, kind of removed and tackled very nicely by the election commissioner. But the Congress government in 1990s became very wary of T.N. Session's authoritative power, right, and T.N. Session's uncontrolled power in a sense, and it instituted a reform into the selection of, onto the office of the election commissioner, because before session we only had one election commissioner, and the Congress government then brought in the reform into the election commission, which made it a three-member committee. So the election commissioner, chief election commissioner would be there, and there would be two election commissioners, right? So basically to distribute the power and not reach power to the head of only one person, right? But it was one of the clever attempts of taming the commission, so to say. In 2024 itself, the Supreme Court had also actually made a kind of observation about the selection procedure of the election commissioner, right? And the Supreme Court mandated, or the Supreme Court observation was that the committee for election commissioners appointment should have a member of the opposition, leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, right? But the government comes out with a notification, and it changes the appointment of the committee for the appointment of the election commissioner by putting the leader of the opposition, a minister from the cabinet, and the Prime Minister, completely removing Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from the equation, making that committee procedural sense. Of course, it's a nice committee. There is the leader of the opposition also there. But in a substantive sense, it was really a 2:1 majority, which was like, everybody would know how the opposition, how the election commissioners would be rather, appointed. And that is also some kind of an interesting thing to observe, that the question or the implications of political finance, or the opacity or the transparency, or rather the reforms which are not there but yet there, is not about so much about the procedural aspects of democracy, which are all running fine in a sense, because elections are happening, quote unquote, they are free and fair. But it is also about the substantive nature of democracy, substantive ideas of elections, which are supposed to be on a level playing field, which are supposed to be free from any kind of intimidations of institutions, or intimidations of money, or any kind of other kind of biases. Which brings me to this interesting case in the end, and I would like to end with this story. And this is a fascinating story, and I recall this from my fieldwork in Bihar. And this is also, I think, a story of where Indian democracy is at present, and I'll end with that. So this weeping gentleman is Anil Kumar Sadhu. He is the son-in-law of late Ramvilas Paswan, right? And Ramvilas Paswan was the leader of Lok Janshakti Party, a regional party in Bihar. And because you were saying, Darshini, that parties are all often selling tickets rather. And this is important to understand that Anil Kumar Sadhu was actually all over the news, all over the headlines, because he started crying in public in an interview with Times Now, I think, if I remember correctly, that his father-in-law is not giving him a ticket. He is not preferring him for candidature in Bochaha constituency, and he has instead given ticket to somebody else, an outsider who has paid money for this ticket. Right? That outsider was Baby Paswan, and in fact, this became a kind of a, this drama that, this drama is also representative of many things in Indian politics. It's representative of dynasty politics, small regional parties, how they are family owned, because the families can, control money and finances and keep it within themselves. This is also indicative of, the idea of parties selling tickets. So finally, Ramvilas Paswan, after a lot of, public outcry, he relented and he gave the ticket. He took the ticket away from Baby Paswan and placated his sobbing son-in-law, who got the ticket finally. But what happened in the election campaign was interesting. So Baby Paswan, who has now been denied of a ticket, stood as an independent candidate. And Baby Paswan's entire electoral plank was, बेबी के साथ अन्याय हुआ, टिकट का पैसा लिया गया और टिकट नहीं दिया गया. And to think of it, she won on anukampa, what is known as sympathy. That actually people started saying that yes, बेबी के साथ अन्याय हुआ, टिकट का पैसा लिया गया और टिकट नहीं दिया गया, right? And Baby Paswan won. So Anil Kumar Sadhu was once again crying as the loser, but perhaps that time not in the view of television cameras, because the television cameras have shifted to Baby Paswan, who became the very interesting story of Bihar elections in 2015. And this also, to me it was fascinating, because this idea that paisa liya gaya, or it's like a transaction you have committed to but not completed, right? And that became actually, that was accepted to the public. And this is something which is also the idea of perception of democracy as something which is about these kind of transactions which happen. And I think that is where the story of Indian democracy is, that we see that, electoral bonds are there, these are quid pro quo is happening, this Keventer farm is giving, this lottery king is giving so much money to, and yet that discourse is just that, it's discourse. It's not really something which is creating any change or churning or any kind of thing, because I think this idea of money being an important and integral part of politics has something which has been, again, imbibed or internalized in the way in which democracy operates in India. And I think that is something which is more a topic of exploration, and as to why that has happened, why this kind of shift has happened. And that's why I said that many of us are actually aware about what all these things are happening because of money, but we might not know the formal language about it, that, oh, this is called the this is called the political finance, or this is called something else, or something. So I think the state of democracy is now something probably like this sobbing gentleman here, which is where I would like to stop, and thank you. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, there are also, one of the ways in which parties gather money is also by putting more parties. So at the time, there are about, I think, more than 650 political parties which are registered with Election Commission, but not all of them are actually contesting. So they get a lot of benefits from the Election Commission and from the Government of India because they are political parties, but they can actually be stations or ways or outlets of just parking some money. This happens also during elections, that many times candidates are also putting up dummy candidates. And those candidates are just to cut some votes. Sometimes opposition also puts dummy candidates. So like that, dummy candidates who will be having the same name. So there was one instance, I think, in a constituency in Andhra Pradesh where there was 41 people with the same name in the in the EVM. So I mean, and many of them were actually put up by the opposition parties, right? Because they just wanted that people would be confused and yeah. But I mean, I think people are also mature, so those kind of tactics don't really become effective. But in a way, there are also similarly dummy parties, which can be one vehicle of bypassing the more legal ways of funding. But yeah, of course, there are many other ways of funding and many other ways of financing which are existing outside of this formal domain also. But my idea was to also show that how this is not, again, the story of electoral bonds is very famous or very highlighted, and because it is part of the actual discourse right now, and this has also come in just in the wake of elections. So, but I think it's important to understand that this has been a kind of a policy issue across regimes, right? And the opacity or the kind of status quo which is enjoyed by political parties in terms of anonymity or keeping the sources anonymous is, I think, something which runs across political parties. And I think that is somewhere you find extraordinary moments in which there is consensus amongst political parties, and there is unity in the house. So yeah, yes. So yeah, I think these are very kind of more fundamental questions, that corruption is an issue. Corruption is definitely an issue, but I think it's also who's talking about it. I think where is the message coming from matters. So Narendra Modi, in his speeches, he's actually talking about corruption, tackling corruption, right? And he's actually, I mean, what he's basically saying that, all of these people who are objecting to even the electoral bonds will actually be, in his words, to quote, पछताएंगे, right? जो आज नाच रहे हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट का verdict सुन के, वो पछताएंगे. These are his exact words, unquote. And I think this impunity comes from a certain kind of a historical understanding of how this entire legal framework of political funding has been. That Supreme Court had actually completely linked, and the Supreme Court judgment actually had linked campaign funding with campaign spending with party spending with candidate spending. But the Parliament, went out and made a new legislation and changed the interpretation of the Act, Representative of People Act, to change and to delink it. And that delink has been enjoying status quo till now. And the delinking has actually one of the major important ideas of why we still have the limits, but those limits are laughable, right? And that kind of, that shows the trajectory that every time the Supreme Court has actually intervened, the Supreme Court has again in 2000, it made the affidavits of disclosure of criminality and financial assets mandatory. Has that shifted? From 2003 onwards, we see that there is a rise in the number of MPs or MLAs who have criminal antecedents. And these are also, serious criminal charges, not only criminal charges which are non-serious nature of like disruption of civil servants from doing their duty. But these are proper, and this is why people like Brij Bhushan Singh or Sengar and others will be, or Bidhuri, who will be continuing to win election, Ajay Mishra Teni, whereas people like Jaishankar perhaps, or Nirmala Sitharaman, she might be intolerable in other ways, but she is an educated lady who is representing a certain kind of an aspirational middle class in India, educated from JNU, and she will not be able to contest election. So I'm just saying that this has a history of how. So that's what I'm saying. So this will, so I don't think this is a technology. It has the it had the potential, it still has the potential, but look at the discourse around it. So the discourse is happening still, I think, limited to certain kind of echo chambers, or, I mean, if you look at it, the way in which electoral bonds were covered or analyzed, right? This idea that the exposés and these kind of, I mean, the data that I showed, there is the electoral bond project, there is Scroll, and there is other alternative medias or independent medias, which we call, they are the ones who are doing it, right? Not really the Hindi newspapers, right? And this is this thing that, to make that a kind of a palpable discourse and to make that kind of a tectonic shift that we want, or the churning from this, we would require a permeation of a very important or more kind of, I mean, more levels. And that is not there. If you go to a village in Bihar or in Odisha, the discourse is not about electoral bonds. Whereas the mining company, which has actually donated 300% more than its profit, might have extracted the natural resources from or near that village, but that it has not seeped into discourse. So one has to understand that, are we then missing out something? Like, are we, I mean, and that statement is very important to understand, that why is the Prime Minister saying, of course he says a lot of things, and a lot of things, most of them are objectionable, but this is actually based on a certain idea of a study of how the system has worked so far. And I think that's why it's not able to translate into that. Yes. The opposition has been using it, but if you, like I said, the opposition has also used opacity as a means of electoral funding or as a means of political finance at every opportunity that they got. Mamata Banerjee, she has sold off parts of the state-owned resources to this quality Keventer group. BRS has this mega infrastructure. Lotto King was giving maximum funding to DMK. I mean, and every party, and again, this is because all parties have to spend money. So, the research which is going on in Andhra Pradesh, Jagan Mohan Reddy has been having street corner meetings. Each of these street corner meetings, I am told, are costing about 70 crore rupees. That's what. So if I had a few interviews with a few candidates and a few people who have won elections. So one thing in candidate expenditure, we understand that from the date of nomination to the date of polling, whatever money you are spending. But even before that, there is a 2-year, 3-year period in which every probable or prospective candidate has to invest. So I was interviewing one candidate in Hyderabad recently. He said that before, and he's a Congress MLA from a tribal seat, ST reserve seat. He has a media company and all. So before his election, or before he became as a viable candidate, because Congress and other parties also, before they decide on who will be the candidate, they carry out these surveys, internal surveys in the constituencies, and they get that whoever name is the most recalled name or most popular name. So how do people gain this popularity? By investing in the constituency. So he said that I spent about 3 to 5 crore rupees in the last 2 years to generate that, so that my name comes up on the top of the survey. I have given more than 2,000 hand pumps. Yeah, exactly, search engine. So the keyword here is money. I had given, he had distributed more than 2,000 hand pumps. And so every hand pump, women are coming to get water, and also they recognize him. He had conducted almost 1,000 feasts in that 2 to 3 year period in the constituency. So I had conducted several weddings, sponsored weddings. So I had spent almost 3 to 5, and this is in a remote tribal constituency in Telangana, right? And this is the kind of investment. So somebody who's contesting from a more, a mainstream constituency, where, like in Vijayawada, that amount would go to about 50 crore rupees. So where are political parties also, where are they getting this money from, or candidates also? So rather than getting the money from the contractor, they are actually giving the ticket to the contractor. So, I mean, one of the candidates in Sambalpur, where our research is actually going on, so the Sambalpur, the candidate is actually having trucks. He has 100 dumpers, and he is using that dumper, or he's ferrying that dumper for mining operations in Jharsuguda, which is the next door constituency, right? So, and extractive, so all like Jindal and all have to use his dumper. So the idea of being in politics is not to increase the number of business, but to establish that as the monopoly business. That if you have to do any operations or mining operations in Jharsuguda, in neighboring constituencies, in and around Sambalpur, you have to take my dumpers, or you have to use my, dumpers. And that is the, that's how local, regional political economy is also being, influenced by politicians, right? And that's where he becomes entrenched, and he is having 100 dumpers. He will get, funding for his elections. He will get funding from his own business, but also from the miner who's using his dumpers. And he can spend much above and beyond the limit. So again, one thing which is interesting to understand, and again, examples from best practices in the world will also help us, probably. In Brazil, there is this, idea of the rule of 10, that every candidate has to spend at least 10 times the limit, right? But in Brazil, the law has actually been changed to make, any kind of electoral fraud or selling of money or giving money for votes as an electoral offense and not a criminal offense. So what has that done is that it has given the power to, to the election commission in Brazil, that they can prosecute. So in our election commission, most of the offenses are actually criminal offense. So the election commission can only give quote unquote stern warning, right? And like they just released one yesterday. So, I mean, with stern warning, that's interpreted as a stern warning. But I mean, as long as there is also, I mean, there has to be legal changes, which and also this question of state funding, right? And Germany and other countries have actually used state funding in a way which is actually incentivizing this. But I'm sorry, to come back to your question, what was the question? Yes, I think. So yes. So right now there are actually 3 ways of funding. So electoral bonds is one way of funding, electoral trust are the other, and then there is also the regular individual donations. In individual donations, there is actually a change. So earlier the donation cap, or the idea of you have to disclose your information on any donation above 20,000 rupees. So now that has been brought down to any donation above 2,000 rupees. I think that has been a change. So in the individual funding, you are actually, individual contributions, you are actually, lowering the cap, so that any donation above 2,000 rupees you will have to, disclose your information. But that's for individual donors. What is interesting is electoral bonds were also allowed for any individual or corporate entity. But we saw that over 90%, I don't know the exact figure, but over 90% of the bonds which were issued were in the denomination of 1 crore rupees or above. So that actually clearly indicates that this is not really being used by individual donors, so as to say that this is being used by corporate donors, because the ED doesn't treat the individuals. I mean, they go after the individuals, but those who are connected to businesses or corporate houses. Yes. Yeah, but I think it also talks about, yes. So the donor and the recipient can be identified, but that also is the case of only one contributor and beneficiary of a trust. But what happens is, often in the trust, there are multiple beneficiaries and multiple donors. So that is also the idea that it is still, one would say that in a relative sense, electoral trusts are still better than the electoral bonds, because there are provisions of transparency. But in actual implementation, it is also not so transparent, because there are multiple, companies which are coming together to form the electoral trust. But again, you see that the number of companies which have taken this trust route is also very limited, right? So 2,200 crore rupees or 2,000 crore rupees is around this money, whereas this is about 16,500. So anonymity has actually incentivized political funding in a way, right? So I think best practices are not always the most popular practices.
How is the electoral bond supposed to take out black money from the process? Because after all, when you give an electoral bond, it's white money.
Yeah.
Is it that while earlier I might have, because I want anonymity, earlier I would have given it in black, now I can give it in white?
So this definition of black money is very restricted to money which is in the banking system. So black money would be, and this is again this idea of depiction of black money as something which is outside of the banking system, which is dealing in cash and everything, and which is this briefcase and all of that. And this definition of black money which is being changed by the, or attacked by the electoral bond, is that any money which is coming into the banking system, because now it is being done by the bank, right? But the problem remains in black money, or the shades of black money, rather maybe gray money, would be that anybody can put any person up for being a donor, right? So I can give you money, who can give B money, who can give C money to donate on behalf of E. So there is no trail. It's very impossible to establish trail that actually that money belongs to E, which has been donated by A, right? So that brings in this idea that, you know, and that's still, like, you know, the source of the money we are not knowing. Only the existing money has been put into the banking system, which is what, it's a victory over like black money, or it's a removal of black money. But the gray sources are still remaining intact. In fact, they are actually incentivized and proliferating because of the anonymity clause. And that's where, I mean, in a good sense, the Supreme Court has actually put that as unconstitutional. But my only concern is, if you look at the literature, if you look at the history of how the regulatory framework has actually worked over years, I don't think this will be that kind of a path-breaking moment as it ought to be, or as it should be for our democracy. Right? So I think that's where my concern is. Yes. So that's the question. So when, so we all know that this money, this company, Quick Supply Chain, which has donated 410 crore rupees. It's actually a company which is, you know, engaging or operating on behalf of the Reliance Foundation or the Reliance Group, right? So Reliance Group market cap is huge, right? But this Quick Supply is having a market supply of how much? Quick Supply, total bonds purchased 410, net profit 109. So it's actually giving 377% more money, right? So 109 is the profit, whereas 410 is the amount of bonds it has purchased. Where is the money coming from? Of course, I mean, and there's no wonder that electoral bonds are the biggest news after, or Indian elections are the most expensive election event in India after the pre-wedding in Jamnagar. It's not fraud. This is all happening legally. This was the law. So, I mean, even something like, say, you know, where is this? It's a company which has been propped up by Reliance also, right? I mean, so this Bharti Airtel group, it has given 247. So they, yeah. So instead of directly pumping money into political donations or political parties, parties often find proxy groups or proxy routes to channel their own money. Yeah, but I mean, in that case, the company can also be closed, right? It can be declared bankrupt.
So are these, you know, popping up and closing as well?
So not all of them, but there is a long list of companies which can also pop up only as this exchange, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to close a company or to shut or to say that it's, yeah. And yeah, and this is again, so this question of the Bharti Airtel group is interesting also, because it actually showed that there was a company which was a subsidiary company or a partially owned company by the Bharti group, which actually was bidding for spectrum allocation. And this is actually something on which the last government got removed because of the 2G spectrum scam, right? But something really similar to that nature has happened this time, and at the time of, or just before the allocation of the spectrum to this company owned by Bharti, Airtel Group had actually given bought bonds of 155 crore rupees. So, I mean, just before the allocation or change of the policy of spectrum allocation, this kind of electoral exchange or exchange of money happens, right? Because the bonds are released, the company goes and buys the bond, and then there is the other company which is owned or partially owned by this company, which is giving the donation, benefits from the policy. So these are very direct and undeniable instances or evidences of quid pro quo happening, right? But then the question is also, why is that not emerging as a more important discourse, as a more important topic? Because I mean, large part of this to be explained of the media's role. The Anna movement and the case against India against corruption was something which was created by the media, that the Ramlila ground and everybody and people working in Infosys and Wipro are educated, middle class were bothered. They were wearing IAC t-shirts and everything, and expressing solidarity and holding candlelight marches through Kaban Park and Bangalore and all of that, despite working 70 hours a week. But that was the very important kind of a media setup. But here you look at this, and that kind of tells us also the role of media, how important it is, and that cannot be substituted by independent media. I mean, of course, it is doing its job and doing more than its fair share, but as long as this side doesn't open up, there is information asymmetry, and that is really something which is putting this or holding this back as becoming a very important topic of conversation. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think the room is empty now. Thank you.